We're getting up close and personal, okay? Today I'm going to tell you about every single book that is on my TBR. So get yourself a cozy drink and a snack because this one is going to be a little bit, hopefully just a little bit longer than my normal videos. Let's get started. This first section is a bunch of mystery and thriller books. This is the genre that I go to when I am in a slump. The first book on this list is Everyone in My Family Has Killed Someone. Tell me you don't have questions about that title, because I certainly do. Next, Killers of a Certain Age. This is about a group of recently retired assassins. And they go on this little trip, or they have this party to celebrate that they've retired, and one of them almost gets killed. Murder Your Employer, The McMaster's Guide to Homicide. Another really catchy title, what can I say? The Thursday Murder Club. This takes place at a senior living center, and so we have this group of older characters who form this club to solve a mystery, and they do. Our Wives Under the Sea. This is about a woman who goes on some deep sea research trip in a submarine, and when she gets back, her wife is like, that's not my wife. Who is that and what happened? Bunny. This is a book that has been talked about on BookTube quite a bit. This is about a group of teenage girls who get into some mysterious dark shenanigans. I don't know. It's been hyped up quite a bit and it sounds really interesting. A book that has a very similar feel, it revolves around like teenage girls and mysterious stuff, is Brutes. I heard a review once that just said, these girls ain't right, and I want to know why. Okay, a third mystery thriller revolving around teenage girls. We have three girls who are friends, and one of them dies mysteriously. Did the other two friends have something to do with it? We don't know. We will find out by the end of the book. This book is called Penance. The Guest. This was recommended by Jack Edwards. I'm gonna be honest, I don't think I'm ever gonna be as smart when it comes to literature as Jack Edwards is, but I wanna feel as smart as Jack Edwards is. You feel me? And so when he had this thriller on his list of favorites, I was like, hey, I can do thrillers. I can do that. So it's on my list. None of this is true. Haley Pham read this last year and hyped it up so much that I had to put it on my list. I had to. Verity by Colleen Hoover. I don't know if I'll ever be able to read Colleen Hoover's romance books, but I've heard that this is more thriller than romance. So if I ever read a Colleen Hoover, Verity is gonna be the Colleen Hoover that I read. When She Was Gone, this is a book that Ava Jules hyped up. So the next few books were also recommended by her. The next one is The Housemaid. This is about a maid who's hired, and there are like weird things going on in this house with this family. Things We Do in the Dark. This was recommended by my favorite booktuber, Allie. So obviously I had to add it to my list. The Only One Left by Riley Sager. This came out last year and there was a lot of buzz around it. General consensus about this book is that it's kind of ridiculous and absurd. Yes, that's what I want. They Never Learn. This book is similar to the movie Promising Young Woman. And then the last book in this thriller mystery section is The First Lie Wins. This was the January book of the month book, so it has been sitting on my shelf since January waiting for me to read it. Moving on, the next section is my comfort books, okay? My comfort genres. A Prayer for the Crown Shy. This book is on here because I recently read A Psalm for the Wild Built, which is the first book in this duology, and I loved it. It was so comforting and so cozy. Exactly what I needed right now, so I am dying to read this book. The Starless Sea. This is one of my must-reads for the year. It's about a man who finds a book in the library that tells a story, something that happened to him when he was a boy, and so it's about him trying to figure out what's going on with that. Watch Over Me, my favorite YouTuber, Allie. This is one of her favorite books. It's about a summer camp, I believe, where all the kids at the summer camp, their trauma is represented by a little ghost that follows them around. And so it's about kids overcoming hard things, and it just sounds very like difficult to read, but in the best way, and reminds us all that we can get through hard things. The Mysterious Benedict Society. This has been on my TBR since like middle school, because there was this girl that I was kind of friends with, and she's like really smart and cool, and I wanted to be better friends with her, and she said that this was her favorite book ever, and so it's been on my TBR ever since. It's kind of like a series of unfortunate events, which is the next book slash series on this list. I tried to read this a few times when I was a kid, but the first line always got me. That first line where it's like, this is a very sad story. If you don't like sad stories, close this book and like take it back. That line, I always took it literally. I don't really like sad stories. I'm not really in the mood for a sad story right now, so I'd always take it back to the library. But I've now watched the TV show and loved it, and it's not that as sad as it makes it out to be. The Unmaking of June Farrow. This is a book that I saw in one of Faith's reading vlogs. She said that this got her out of a reading slump. It's a magical realism mystery. So two of my favorite genres. Some Kind of Happiness. I don't really know what this book is about. I just know it's a middle grade fantasy, and that is like my go-to feel-good genre. A Witch's Guide to Magical Innkeeping. This isn't a sequel, but it is in the same world as Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches, which was one of my favorite books last year. So excited for this next book. This book is called The Rooftoppers. This is about some kids in Paris who have some magical powers and they go on adventures at night. Neverwhere. This is by Neil Gaiman, and he has recently become one of my go-to authors because his writing is magical. Instructions. It's a picture book by Neil Gaiman. This next little section isn't necessarily the middle grade fantasy, but it is still a like comfort genre, and that is anything Jane Austen related. First is The Other Bennet Sister. This is about Mary Bennet from Pride and Prejudice. More insight into her life. This is Longbourn. This is a story about the servants that work in the Bennet household. Most Ardently, a Pride and Prejudice remix. This is a gay version of Pride and Prejudice. And the next, they aren't Jane Austen related at all, but they are set in the Regency time period. First is The Wisteria Society of Lady Scoundrels. If the Regency time period had magic in it, and if the main characters were kind of like witchy. The next one is Half a Soul. Similar kind of theme, Regency magic, but instead the characters are all like fairies. Those are my comfort genre books. Moving on to genres that I want to read more of. The first genre that I want to get more into is cozy fantasy. And the first book on this list is Can't Spell Treason Without T. Some people don't think this qualifies as cozy fantasy because it's got too much going on. And so I think this is a good place for me to dip my toe in the cozy fantasy genre, because I feel like if I jump into like one of the books that has no plot and it's just vibes, I might give up on cozy fantasy. Moving on, Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia Fairies. This is a cozy fantasy and it has a little bit of romance, and it's one of my friend's current favorite books, and she has really good taste in books. The Ornithologist's Field Guide to Love. It just sounds cute, okay? It sounds kind of like a similar idea to like Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia Fairies, where, you know, you have this like researcher or whatever and then they find love along the way. Sounds cute. A Wizard's Guide to Defensive Baking. That title, if it's got a good, interesting, intriguing, whimsical title, there's a good chance I'm just gonna add it to my TBR. We're moving from cozy fantasy now into graphic novels. The first one being Squire, which is like a middle grade fantasy graphic novel. The Moth Keeper, another fantasy kind of novel, and it's illustrated by Kay O'Neill, who illustrated the Tea Dragon Society graphic novels, which are so cozy and so cute, and I loved reading those last year. Bug Boys. This is a graphic novel series that Allie has hyped up a bunch in the last year. It's about two little beetles who are best friends and they go on adventures. It just looks and sounds really cute. All right, now we're getting into some dark academia books. The first being A Study in Drowning. This is about a girl who loves fairy tales, just like I love fairy tales. So relatable. If We Were Villains. This was recommended by my friend who has really good taste in books. Then An Education in Malice. In this book, there's a character named Carmilla, and it's got very gothic vibes. So I had to add it to my list because Carmilla I read last year for my Halloween readathon and I loved it. So this was giving me Carmilla vibes for obvious reasons. Next, some sci-fi books. First being Project Hail Mary. This has been talked about on BookTube quite a bit. It's about a man who's wakes up on a spaceship, doesn't know why he's there, how he got there, but there are a bunch of other people who are asleep, and the spaceship is about to crash or explode or something like that, and he needs to figure out what's going on so he can save all the people in the spaceship. Dune, I've added to my TBR for reasons. I think it'll be good. The Illustrated Man. This is a bunch of sci-fi short stories, and again, it was recommended by yet another very good friend of mine. A Long Way to a Small Angry Planet. This is by Becky Chambers, who wrote the Song for the Wild Built and Prayer for the Crown Shy. The last book in this sci-fi list is called The Sparrow, and it's one of my best friend's favorite books of all time. Moving on, we got a bunch of romance books here, okay? Starting with Part of Your World. Allie doesn't seem to be much into romance books, but she said this one was really good, so I'm hoping that I have similar feelings towards it, since I also don't tend to really like romance books. So maybe this will get me into romance. 7 Days in June. This is another book that Allie really liked, so I'm hoping I'll like it too. 7 Year Slip. This is a romance and it has to do with like time travel, and I'm hoping that there's some other stuff going on in the plot other than just romance, and it might feel a little bit more balanced, maybe. Alone with You in the Ether. This one is, I've heard some people say, it's like a modern classic. It's stunning, it's beautiful, it's written so well. Jack Edwards recommended it, so I want to read it and I want to feel smart like Jack Edwards. Undertaking of Heart and Mercy. This is a romance and there's zombies involved, I guess. So again, romance plus something else to maybe balance out some of the romance. We'll see. Bodyguard. The only reason I added this to the list is because the main character's name is Hannah, and that's my name. Another book where the main character's name is Hannah, is a true account. Hannah Masery's sojourn amongst pirates. Sounds like an adventure, and the main character's name is Hannah. I feel like there aren't very many books where the main character's name is Hannah. If there is a book where the main character's name is Hannah, I'm gonna add it to my list. That's just who I am, okay? Another thing is I like Halloween. My birthday's in October. I've always loved Halloween, so here's some Halloween themed books. First, Ravenfall. This is about two kids who live in a magical town and they have to save the town from a monster. It sounds like Halloween Town. The unfortunate side effects of heartbreak and magic. This is Halloween and it's romance. I like Halloween stuff. I'm trying to like romance, so it's on the list. Flufoot, A Tale of Bewitchery. This is about a woman who lives in like colonial America and she is cast out from her Puritan community and has to make a deal with the devil to survive. Next, An Interview with a Vampire. This is one of the books that I am going to try to read for my Halloween readathon this year. Another book that has to do with vampires is called House of Hunger. This is about a girl who lives in this like Victorian-esque setting and she is hired by this family of vampires. She doesn't know they're vampires though, and they've hired her so that they can suck her blood. It was giving me Mexican Gothic vibes where this girl goes into this creepy setting, doesn't realize how creepy it is until she gets there. And Mexican Gothic was one of my favorite books of last year. Okay, now we're getting into some like haunted house books because again, Mexican Gothic had some haunted house vibes and I want more of those vibes this Halloween. The first book in this haunted house section is The Grip of It. This was recommended by Katie Marie Reeds. The September House. Moving on to The House of Hollow. Allie said about this book that it was unsettling and it made her a little bit nauseous, and that's exactly how I felt about Mexican Gothic. So I had to add it to my list. These two aren't really haunted house, but they're still like Gothic spooky setting books. The first being Starling House. This, I saw it on a list of books that are supposedly very similar to Mexican Gothic, so that's why this is on the list. The Narrow. This is about a haunted boarding school rather than a haunted house, and there's some ghosts involved. What Moves the Dead. This is just creepy. It's not haunted house, it's just creepy, and it's by T. Kingfisher, and it was recommended by my brother's girlfriend. There's No Way I'd Die First. This is more horror, less Gothic, and just horror. It's about a girl who loves horror movies and then she one day finds herself in a horror movie like situation in her real life, and will she survive using the knowledge that she has from horror movies? Who knows? This is Monstrilio. This is about a woman whose son dies and then she cuts off a piece of his body and keeps it because she's grieving, but then it turns into this little monster. Sounds kind of weird, kind of creepy, but also kind of deep, maybe? Small Angels. This is a twisting Gothic tale of darkness, intrigue, and heartbreak. Dun dun dun. Okay, moving on. We're gonna get into some retellings here. Some like fairy tale, folklore, retelling books. The first two are both revolving around like Russian and Eastern European folklore. The first is Deathless, the second is Thistlefoot. Both of these were recommended by Katie Marie. I want to learn more about Russian/Eastern European folklore. The Inquisitor's Tale, or The Magical Three Children and Their Holy Dog. This book is a retelling of the Canterbury Tales, which is an interesting choice of a story to retell, and it has a greyhound on the cover. It's Legendborn. This is a retelling of Arthurian legend, and it's like a YA version of it. Next is another Arthurian legend retelling called Song of the Sparrow. This is one of my best friend's favorite books of all time, so it's on the list. The Sorceress Comes to Call. This is by T. Kingfisher, an author I want to read this year. It's a retelling of The Goose Girl. The Goose Girl by Shannon Hale was my favorite fairy tale slash book when I was a teenager. Heart of the Raven Prince. I think this is a retelling of Cinderella. I love Cinderella. That's probably my favorite fairy tale. I know, super basic, but I love Cinderella. Dreams Lie Beneath. This is just another fairy tale retelling. I like fairy tale retellings, okay? Into the Heartless Wood. This, I don't think this is a retelling, but I think it is like a fairy tale feeling book. The Bloody Chamber and Other Stories. This is a collection of like darker, more twisted fairy tales, I think, possibly. When the Tiger Came Down the Mountain. This is a, I believe, a collection of short stories revolving around like folklore. The Fisherman and His Soul. This is a fairy tale written by Oscar Wilde. I want to feel smart. I want to read some Oscar Wilde and feel smart while doing it. The Weaver and the Witch Queen. I stole this from my friend's TBR and it sounds medieval. It sounds fairy tale-ish. Now we're getting into nonfiction. And this first book I also stole from my friend's TBR. It is called Before Scotland. It is like a prehistory of Scotland, and my husband and I want to travel to Scotland in the near future, so I thought this would be a good book to read before we go. Monsters, A Fan's Dilemma. This is a book about celebrity and like why we treat celebrities differently than other humans. The Anthropocene Reviewed, Essays on a Human Human-Centered Planet by John Green. I've heard so much about it. It sounds interesting. And I loved John Green when I was a teenager. Reading Sweetgrass, Indigenous Wisdom, Scientific Knowledge, and the Teaching of Plants. I want to better appreciate the world around me and take better care of it, and I thought this might help me do that. Another book that will help me do that is We Are the Weather, Saving the Planet Starts at Breakfast. Lena Norms here on YouTube said that this made her go vegan, and I've been on the fence about making that same decision, so maybe this will push me over to that side of the fence. It's not that radical. Climate action to transform our world. This was another Lena Norms recommendation, and again, I want to learn about our home so I can take better care of it. The Wager, A Tale of Shipwreck, Mutiny, and Murder. Come on. Who doesn't want to read A Tale of Shipwreck, Mutiny, and Murder? Shakespeare Was a Woman and Other Heresies. I heard about this because a YouTuber that I follow named Caroline Winkler, her sister, wrote this book, and so she was talking about this book. It sounded really interesting and I want to read it. Period Power. Harness your hormones and get your cycle working for you. I want to learn about my body, how it works, how I can better take care of it, and ejaculate responsibly. A whole new way to think about abortion. You know, Eve, 200 million years of human evolution thanks to the female body. I think that's what it's called. I want to feel like a badass. I want to know just how much of a badass I am just being a woman. And I feel like this would make me feel pretty cool. I'm pretty proud to be a woman. I don't know. We'll see. We have a few women's prize for nonfiction books here. First is Thunderclap, Art, Life, and Sudden Death. There's sudden death in the title, and that is interesting to me. Wifedom. This is about the wife of George Orwell, and like, I'm guessing what it must be like to be the wife of someone famous like that, who's like so well known. Could be interesting. Some People Need Killing. That is a killer title if you ask me. Moving on to The Myth of Normal. Trauma, illness, and healing in a toxic culture. I want to learn more about how to take care of myself, how to take care of my body, and I think this could give me some good insight into that. You know? You feel me? How to Do Nothing, Resisting the Attention Economy. I want to learn how to do nothing. These next few books are not strictly nonfiction, but they are kind of a similar theme as that last. So first is The Self-Care Year, Reflect, Recharge, and Simple Seasonal Rituals. I want to live my best life, okay? I want to be my best, healthiest self, and maybe this will help me with that. Another thing that I think might help me with that is a graphic novel called Feelings, A Story in Seasons. This is very similar to that Self-Care Year one, where it's about understanding your feelings and how they change through the seasons and how that's okay. 5 People We Meet in Heaven. This is just some cheesy life advice that we all need. Poetry Pharmacy, Tried and True Prescriptions for the Mind, Heart, and Soul. This is a collection of poetry that is like grouped together based on feelings. So if you're feeling sad, you read these poems. If you're feeling stuck in life, you read these poems. If you're feeling on top of the world, you read these poems. And I like that. I like that approach, and I think that could help me get into poetry. So this next section is titled Real People, Real Feelings, because I want to feel things. Some of these are autobiographies and some of these are just literary fiction, but they're all like made to feel like real people. Oh my goodness. First, On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous. This is written beautifully. It's one of my must reads for the year. How a Person Should Be. This is very philosophical and hopefully answers the question, how should a person be? Notes on an Execution. This is about a man who's on death row who I believe assaulted a bunch of women and maybe killed some of them, and so you see things from his perspective as well as the women's perspective, and is execution ever a good choice? Boy Swallows the Universe. This is also very philosophical, but from the perspective of a young boy, so maybe a little bit more accessible than something like How a Person Should Be. Moving on. Eleanor Oliphant is completely fine. I have seen a few shorts by Kalila, I think is her name, and she has hyped this book up so much that I'm curious to read it. The Bell Jar, I learned about this when I was in school and feel like I need to read it to feel some stuff, you know? Wellness, this book was hyped up by another YouTuber named Nikel, and it's about a couple who's been together for decades and how they have changed over these decades and how their relationship has changed. She made it sound really good. White Teeth, another YouTuber, I can't remember her name. If I can find the video, I will link it below, but she just was raving about white teeth and how astonishing it was. So it's on my list. In Memoriam, this is about a gay couple during World War I. Again, Jack Edwards recommended it, so it's on my list so I can feel smart. The 8 Lives of a Century-Old Trickster. This is nominated for the Women's Prize in Fiction this year, and it sounds interesting because it's an old woman telling the story of her life, and she's lived a lot of lives in her one life. Okay, now we're getting into some like war-torn country kind of stories. First is Black Butterflies. This is about a woman living in this place. War breaks out and she doesn't leave leave immediately, and then as the war progresses, she just kind of gets used to it. So it's kind of like if you stick a frog in a pot of water and then stick it on the stove, it doesn't realize that the water is getting hotter and hotter, you know? The Kite Runner, this takes place in Afghanistan. I've heard a lot about Afghanistan growing up, just knowing that there's war and things happening there, but I don't know much about the country or the culture or the people who live there. And I want to read a story that takes place there so I can understand those things better. I also want to understand Palestine better, which is why Against the Loveless World is on my list. Palestine is a country that I've heard a lot about recently, very recently, and so I want to understand its people and its culture better through this book. The next 3 books are all racism related. First is The Vanishing Half. This is about 2 sisters, I believe, and one of them, they're both black, but one of them can pass as white. So they kind of go their ways. One presents herself as white, the other one doesn't. Kindred, this is about a woman from the 70s, the 1970s, who by some means travels back in time to like pre-Civil War South and ends up on the same plantation as like her ancestors. Gets a real close look at what life was like for them. The last book in this little section is called Ring Shout. It's like an alternate history of the US where like that really racist movie that came out in the 1920s, everyone who watches that movie then becomes a zombie, like a really racist zombie. And so then everybody who doesn't watch the movie, who doesn't become a zombie, works together to kill all the racist zombies. That sounds good. A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man. In this book, the main character is leaving religion, so it has like themes about like what that's like and how it feels to leave religion, and that is something that I have recently gone through myself. Transcendent Kingdom. This has themes of being like multicultural and growing up in a country that is different than like the country that your parents or grandparents grew up in. That is something that I too feel because I have many cultures in my family and I don't understand them fully. Beautiful Country, what it's like being an immigrant in the US. Kind of similar feel to like the last one. Crying in H Mart, this is a memoir and it made Allie cry for the first time. The first book that ever made Allie cry, and I want to feel that too. Everything I Know About Love, this was described to me as a book that's like really good for girls in their 20s who don't know what they want to do with their lives to read. That's me. Born a Crime, Stories from a South African Childhood. This is by Trevor Noah. His parents are a biracial couple and that was not allowed when he was born. He was born a crime, and that sounds interesting. This last memoir on this list is I'm Glad My Mom Died by Jeanette McCurdy. This just sounds really good, okay? I've heard a lot about it online. I'm sure you've heard a lot about it online, and I want to read it, okay? Moving on. We're all a little bit messed up because this is my section of nonfiction all about psychology and trauma. First is maybe you should talk to someone, a therapist, her therapist, and Our Lives Revealed. And this is about how therapy works and like why it works. What My Bones Know, this is about like complex post-traumatic stress, how this author overcame that. Tiny Traumas, when you don't know what's wrong, but nothing feels quite right. I relate to that title. The Body Keeps the Score, Brain, Mind, and Body in the Healing of Trauma. This is just a topic I want to know more about. And Come As You Are, the surprising new science that will transform your sex life. I just want to, you know. These next 5 books were all recommended by Jack Edwards. And why do I read Jack Edwards recommendations? Because I want to feel smart. Okay. After Sappho, about sapphic authors in history, and it's a fictional conversation between all of them, I think. The Penelopiad, this is a retelling of the Odyssey, but from Odysseus's wife's perspective. Demon Copperhead, this is a retelling of the classic novel David Copperfield by Charles Dickens. Letters to a Young Poet, this is a classic, good, easy way to get into classics if you're trying to get into more classics. And last is Hamnet. This is from the perspective of Anne Hathaway, Shakespeare's wife, and what it was like being Shakespeare's wife. All right, this last section is just kind of random, but for the most part, all of these books are on this list because somebody at some point in time was talking about them and was really excited about them, so I added them to my list. First is Big Swiss. Carrie from Carrie Can Read said this was hilarious. She loved it. So funny. Divine Rivals. I've heard it has like World War II vibes, but it's like a fantasy. Sounds interesting. I've heard a lot about it. Again, that's why it's on the list. The Inheritance Games. This is kind of like Knives Out. Somebody unexpected inherits everything, and the family who thought they should inherit everything is mad about it. This is The Lies of Locke Lamora. I think this is about pirates, and Murphy Napier just loves this. Nothing to see here. This is a nanny who is hired to take care of 2 kids who spontaneously combust. Random, but it sounds good. Six of Crows. This was a Christmas gift from my sister. It's a heist in a fantasy world. I like heists. Should be fun. Dangerous Liaisons. This was recommended by a good friend of mine who really likes French literature, and maybe I want to branch out into some international/translated literature. Maybe. The Swimmers. This was highly recommended by by Carrie Can Read. The Luminaries was really hyped up, really recommended by Haley Pham. The Count of Monte Cristo, one of my best friends back in high school, this was her favorite book of all time. And so it's been on my list ever since then. And again, international translated literature. The Book Eaters, I can't remember who recommended this, but I do remember what it's about. It's people who eat books and then remember and like retain everything that was within the book. Sounds interesting. Iron Widow, I saw a TikTok of the author of this book talking about it and how she was inspired by an empress from China, maybe, who killed a lot of people. Sounds interesting and dramatic. And lastly is Iron Flame. This is the sequel to Fourth Wing, which I just recently read, so that's why it's on the list. And those are every single book that is on my TBR. How many books is that? That's a lot of books. Okay, thank you so much for listening and watching. I hope you've been able to add some more books to your TBR and we can read some of these books together. If you have any recommendations for me of books that I should add to this very long list of mine, please list those in the comments below. My TBR is always growing and I'm okay with that. So please give me all the recommendations. All right, with all that said, thank you so much for watching. Thank you for listening to me ramble about books. I will see you in my next one. Bye. Sojourn Against. Nope, no. Nope, that's worse than it was before. And it's kind of like a series of two braiding squeak. Moving on.